Well, Janice Nikkel, thank you so much for joining me on the 700 Club Canada today.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks, Lori.
Well, Janice, as a teenage girl, you brought attention to the largest aviation disaster in Canadian history. It is recorded that it was the greatest single loss of life in the history of the 101st Airborne Division from Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And this is the 35th anniversary of the remembrance of that tragedy. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, so these soldiers and these were peacekeepers. They were coming home on a peacekeeping mission from the Middle East. It was right before Christmas. They had all flown on this plane from the Middle East, landed in Gander, Newfoundland, called their families who were all at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, said, "We're coming home." And then upon takeoff, their plane exploded. They think it was ice. We don't know. There's a lot of speculation about this crash. But at the end of the day, they were all from the same Army base, Army post in Fort Campbell, and all died.
Well, you know, I'm sure there's some viewers watching and they'll say, I remember that day.
Yeah.
You know, as a young teenage Canadian girl, here you are, you got involved in the cause to encourage and remember those that had died. Tell us what you did in response and why you did it.
Well, it's actually kind of interesting. I felt like a normal kid. I was just going to high school, interested in school and sports and boys and normal stuff. And actually, the accident hadn't really been on my radar a ton, though it was in the media a lot. My mom, it was the one who had compared the accident to 10 classrooms at my high school, where each person had someone die right before Christmas.
Wow.
And they were all from the same place. So that personalized it for me. And so I just asked, what are Canadians doing? And she says, I don't know. And in our family, we had a tradition of planting trees in memory of people who had passed away, like my grandma and stuff. And so that night, I wrote a letter to the Toronto Star, and I said, I'd like to donate my babysitting money to plant trees as a living memorial for these soldiers.
Wow.
I didn't know what would happen with that letter. I just said, Lord, I'm 15. You can do with this what you would like. And he did. So
that is
it hit
incredible.
the news wires pretty quick.
That's incredible. Like you aren't your normal average teenage girl. Can I just say that?
Okay. Well, hopefully not anymore.
That's amazing response. I mean, you just went into action. And that's what compassion is, right? It's taking action when you're moved, and you were moved by what you saw. And you recently were in touch with the Major General of the Post, and he said it took 2 years to bring home all the bodies from the Gander tragedy. Every state and territory was represented on that plane. And he also shared with you that Ronald Reagan and you were his biggest sources of encouragement and hope during the hardest season of his career. Wow. You and a president of the United States. I mean,
in the same breath.
Right? Why do you think God used you to be involved in this? And you know, as you look back, how did it impact the trajectory of your life?
Yeah, that's a good question, Lori. I do believe that God loves to use people who have open hands. And so I remember thinking, I'm 15 years old, Lord, you can do with this what you want. And he did. Yeah. And that's all he ever asks for, is just willing hands to do what he wants to do. And he snowballed this. And we ended up, like 9 months after writing that letter, I was dedicating a forest of Canadian sugar maple trees in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, before about 1,000 soldiers and family members. Like, that was not anything I dreamed would happen in my life.
Right.
I thought nothing would happen from this. I didn't think it would go beyond that year, that part of my life. Mm-hmm. But within a year, I was in Brian Mulrooney's office. I had a chance to pray with him in his office. I was honored in a telegram from Ronald Reagan. I was made honorary junior citizen of Ontario. It was like surreal.
Wow.
And I had a friend say, Janice, don't let it go to your head. And I was like, okay, fine. You know, you're a teenager.
Yeah.
But I was so grateful for the privilege of being part of this. But then I didn't talk about it for a long time. And
That's
so I thought, well, I don't want anyone thinking I'm trying to make a big deal of myself about this. But it wasn't until the 25th anniversary that I drove through with my husband. We were visiting my family in the States. And we got to the Army gate, and I told the lady at the guard at the gate, I said, I'd like to visit these trees that I'd helped plant 25 years earlier. And she was quite a tough looking girl. And she just says, well, what's the purpose of your visit? And I said, well, I'd like to bring my kids here to see these trees. She dropped her pen, her eyes welled up with tears. And she said, not a day goes by when I don't think about my cousin who was on that flight. Thank you for what you did. And I was
Wow.
pretty humbled by that 25
Mhm.
years later, it was still having an impact, that my kids got to see it. And
Yeah.
then I realized, you know what? Here I'd been keeping this story somewhat quiet all these years. When I realized I could have been sharing this story and say, you know what? This might inspire other young people to make a difference. This was before all the Me to We stuff and all the young people doing mission trips the same way they do now. But it
Mhm.
was, it's been a fun story to share and just say, look what God did.
Well,
So
I think there's a real lesson here. Like you say, you weren't looking for attention. You did this as a genuine act of compassion. And by sharing our stories, right? We encourage other people to think maybe I could make a difference in someone's life. And here the legacy of that choice as a youth is living on. How encouraging that is, Janice. I think it's
totally.
important you are sharing the story because I think someone watching right now has been encouraged to take compassion and who knows 25 years from now what might come of it, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite a privilege. Last year I got to go down for the 34th um, anniversary. And the only reason it was a big deal was because the trees that we'd originally planted, their roots were entwining. And so they had to plant new trees. And
Wow.
what it did was bring back people from all those years coming back to this. And it was pretty poignant how all these years later it was still impacting those families who'd
Yes.
lost a loved one.
Wow,
And
that's yeah.
all of us understand grief a little bit more this year.
Yeah.
And I think compassion is something that we all want a little bit more of. And so,
I think that's a very good word. I think you're right on. And if your story and example can move us to compassion in our time of grief, that's a great response. And we live in a day and age when our world is so desperately needs peace, right? These men and women who died that day, they were peacekeepers. And
yes,
the
they were.
words you had put on the plaque, which is prominently displayed now at Fort Campbell, simply says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." What lesson can
Yeah.
we learn from this tragedy in Gander that will help us face maybe the challenges in our world today, Janice?
I was listening to that song Voice of Truth by Casting Crowns recently, and I thought there's so many messages that are being bombarded in our lives right now. And how do we listen to that voice of truth? And, I had a Sunday school teacher who said, God gives us enough hours in the day to do what he wants us to do.
Hmm.
And as we listen and seek to honor the Lord in our day-to-day lives, there's there's something very beautiful about being part of this generation that God's called us to right
Yeah.
now. Like all of us were born in this generation. God, none of this is unseen, what's happening in our world right now.
Right.
But God has a plan and a purpose for each of us and a job to do. And we just have to have those willing hands to just hold them out and say, God, I'm willing to be used by you no matter what you have in store for me and what this might look like. But I want to be faithful to you. Even if it doesn't make sense, I'm going to give you the praise and glory. And I'm going to trust you on the journey.
Yeah.
And you walk with him. And it's a faith adventure like nothing else.
Right?
And I've had the privilege of being part of this on my life journey. And I'm thankful
Mhm.
for a mom who inspired me that way too.
Well, I think that's such a great word. And, never underestimate a little act of kindness. We don't all get to plant a memorial forest of trees, but one act of kindness can make a difference in someone's life today. And you continue to influence wherever you go, Janice. A little known fact is that you were Pat Robertson's assistant during his run for presidency. Wow. What would you say to those watching then that might feel like the world's problems are way too big and there's nothing they can do to make a difference? I mean, you touched on this, but just give us another word of encouragement on it.
Well, I really like that verse. Don't let anyone look down upon you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in your life, speech, faith, purity. I love inspiring young people. I love inspiring young moms. I remember being on our farm in the middle of nowhere because I used to think I'd had all these amazing opportunities and then I got put in a farm and I felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, Lord, how can you use me even here? And within a week of asking that, this lady said, if you'd ever like me to lead a Bible study at your home, I'm happy to. So within a week, I had 6 ladies at my house for a Bible study. I didn't even have to leave my house. I'm like, Lord, you are so cool. You
Yeah.
make things happen just like that. I couldn't have even made it up. He just does that kind of stuff when we allow him to. It's exciting.
You know what? You're right, Janice. He just does that kind of stuff. And he does that kind of stuff with people who are willing to say, yes, I'll do whatever. And I liked your prayer, like, Lord, what am I going to do on this farm, right? And he just filled your house with those women. That's such a good word. Janice, thank you for your example. Thank you for retelling the story I think it's really important that you share the story of this, not just the tragedy, but the hope and that was brought from it. For more information on Janice, you can go to 700club.ca and you can find out she is just a mover and a shaker out there in BC. Thank you, Janice, for being with us today.
My privilege.
Okay. Well,
Thanks,
now
Lori.
Daniel finds his true identity. Watch this.